Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a review and demonstration of this hisense WFQP9014EVM. This will apply for any of the ranges, any of the models in the range WFQP. It will not apply for WFQY or WFQA models, as they are technically the previous generation of this range. They have some differences, and I will talk about those differences later, because in some ways I prefer those models, in other ways I prefer these WFQP models, which again I'll talk about later. Now, some basic information about this machine. It's a 9 kilo rated machine. It has a 54 litre drum, and it has a spin speed of 1400 RPM. You can also get a 7 kg 1200 RPM model. 7 kg, I don't know off the top of my head what the drum volume is for that model. I believe there's also 6 kilo models and 8 kilo models out there, but I've never seen them, so couldn't tell you what the spin speeds are. But I'm going to assume that the 6 kilo will be 1200 and the 8 kilo could be either 1200 or 1400. But again, haven't seen them, so not sure. So I'll go over some of the programs and options. Obviously not all of them, because that is going to be a separate video. First of all, my most used cycle is cotton. In general, most things go on there. Also synthetic for a slightly shorter wash time, but that does sacrifice performance, which again I will talk about when we get to the performance section. We'll start off with cotton. So by default that is 3 hours 29 minutes. It will adjust only very slightly though. The sensing really does let this machine down, which I'll get onto in a minute. By default you've got 40 degrees. You can also have 60, which I like to use a lot. 60 is my favourite temperature. That does increase the time slightly. Again, it will adjust, but not very well. You can also have 90, but that's going to be the same length as 60. But if you want to reduce it to lower temperatures, for example if I select 20, it will significantly shorten to just over 2 hours, which is actually very good for a hisense cotton cycle. As for synthetic, it's about the same as the shortest cotton. By default, it defaults to 40. You can have up to 60. It won't let you have up higher than 60. That does not change the time on synthetic. And also what I like about this, 1400 spin on synthetic. That's always good. Never used to be like that. Back in the day, synthetic cycles were 800, 900 RPM, depending on what you have. Some were even lower, at 600. Obviously depends on what you have. Some other cycles I like. The Allergy cycle is okay. I don't tend to use it a lot. It's quite short. It does have 4 rinses though, and they're quite deep. But the overall performance, spin performance in particular, even though it allows 1400, it's not that great, which again I'll explain why later. But those are a few of the cycles I like the most. Oh, I also like the Eco 4060 cycle, actually. It does very well. And it's the only cycle I think that actually lives up to the 4060 name. Because if you do a small load, it will heat to 40. If you do a full load, it heats to 60. 58 degrees. Which is not meant to do, just for clarification. That's not how Eco 4060 is meant to work at all, because it defeats the purpose of it being Eco, to heat right up to 60. But it is a nice cycle. So those are some of the cycles I like to use. As for let's talk about some experiences I've had with this machine. I've had this for about 6 months now, I think. At the time of filming, it is the start of February, and I have had this since the 13th of August the year before, so 2023. It's been good. it's obviously not my main machine. I am a collector, so I have several machines. I have 4, and then the household machine. So there's 5 machines in the house at the moment. This is not one. This is not my main machine. I bought this mainly for the channel and because I find them entertaining. I didn't buy it for performance, and again, you're going to find out why soon. But overall experience, it's actually a pretty big improvement on their WFQY and WFQA ranges. Mainly, actually, in introducing synthetic. However, what I don't like about what they've done by introducing synthetic, they've got rid of the cotton colour cycle. And I would argue the cotton colour cycle was much more useful, because that was like 10 cycles in one, depending on what temperature and spin speed you set on the cotton colour cycle, and whether or not you used intensive on the cotton colour cycle. But I will say this, the cotton colour 60 cycle, only the 60 cycle, has been moved to cotton 60 with intensive. You'll notice it's 4 hours long, exact same length as cotton colour 60, and much like cotton colour 60, does not sense, does several spin washes, and does a very long hold final spin at true 1400, which is basically cotton colour. However, what they have also done is, before I change the temperature, the 60 degree version is no longer eco, it heats 260, and there is also now a 40 degree version of that cycle, which is 3.5 hours long, but acts exactly the same. So yeah, I really like that actually. I'm very glad that they've done that. Reliability I would comment on, but I feel like it's a bit too early. But one thing I can comment on is, on my previous hisense, which was a WFQY model, that was a WFQP9014EVM, so 10 kilo 1400 model. Within 2 weeks of owning that model, the shock absorbers, where it attaches to the base of the machine, there was some kind of manufacturing defect there, and all it was doing is rattling endlessly. And it wasn't to do with the shocks themselves, it was the chassis of the machine where it had been manufactured. And this also brings me on to another point, which I'll move on to in a second, about the warranty process and how Hisense are with dealing with their customers. But within 2 weeks, obviously, I first of all looked through the bottom to see if it was anything obvious, and also looked in the back, which you're technically not meant to do, but as long as you don't alter anything, then there's no way of them knowing really. But I couldn't see anything, so I decided I put up with the noise for a bit more, and then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna actually get the warranty people involved, because obviously it was under warranty, it was only a couple of weeks old at that point. I never heard anything from them, no matter like what I did. So I tried to do some further investigating. Unfortunately, determined it was the chassis, unfixable, sadly. So I sold it on to someone who could put up with the noise ultimately, and I got fairly decent money back from it. I got £235 for it. It cost me $389 brand new, so I'm not too fussed actually. $235 for a technically defective machine but still fully functional isn't bad in my opinion. So yeah, as for this machine though, as you'll be able to hear soon, this is coming up on 6 months old now, if not more, and there's no sign of that. So either I had a bad model, or they have improved in their quality and, well, quality control, shall we say, and manufacturing. Now that's not technically Hisense's fault, because you do get defective models of any brand, but I just wanted to make a point of that, because their warranty people don't seem interested in dealing with anything. So, I don't know. If you've had any experience with their warranty people, do let me know how that went for you, because I never heard anything from them. Anyway, moving on. As I said, reliability, too early to comment, but so far so good. Now, I have mentioned performance multiple times. We are going to go on to that now, as well as overall programming. So we're going to combine them together, programming and performance. Firstly, because I've mentioned it multiple times, the performance of certain cycles. Now, namely, synthetic, allergy steam, baby steam care, and that's it actually. So those 3 cycles, they all allow 1400 spin. However, because of the way the final spin is programmed, it holds for 20 seconds at 1400, which, for looking at the cycle's lengths, 2 hours cycle holding at 1400 for 20 seconds, I would consider that rather unacceptable myself. For a cycle to hold, for a cycle longer than about an hour to hold at max speed for less than a minute, unless it's a delicate cycle, you know, not very good for me personally. Now, on a lot of machines that would not be a problem. However, due to Hisense's drum design, which has very little holes, and when I say very little holes, I mean barely any holes. If you did a spin in this machine after it's had water in the drum, empty, you did an empty spin up to 1400 on the spin only cycle, which holds for a minute at 1400, there would still be water in the drum because of how the drum's designed. Now that combined with that 20-second hold produces awful spin performance, and actually I have spun jeans and neck curtains at 1400, and if you didn't know, neck curtains don't absorb anything, barely. The neck curtains came out wet from my other Hisense, but they would do the same in this, guaranteed. And when the jeans spin had finished, there was water in the drum somehow. And it's not because the machine's got a fault, it's just down to design. And the only way you can get around that, really, you can use the separate spin only cycle, which is at 1400, 12 minutes long, but do remember to change it up to 1400 because it defaults to 1000 for some reason. And in some videos I've seen people just turn it to spin, let it do a 1000 spin, and then wonder why there's no performance increase. There won't be from a 1000 spin after a 1400. So yeah, that will hold for 1 minute, as I said. However, you also have cotton, which does the same final spin. So the spin only cycle is the cotton final spin. That will hold for 1 minute as well. If you use the old cotton colour cycle, which is either 40 or 60, which is 3.5 hours, 4 hours, neither of them sense, by the way, and this is important. Both of them cycles hold at true 1400 RPM, 1405 to be exact, for 5.25 minutes, which is brilliant. That's a brilliant final spin, and it actually provides quite good performance, even from Hisense's drum. So yeah, but to have a 3.5 hour or a 4 hour cycle as the only cycle with acceptable spin performance is pretty awful in my opinion, and nowhere near suitable for the average user. It's fine for me because I use those all the time. I have 3.5 hours, 4 hours to burn. I have nothing against long cycles. I actually quite like a long cycle myself. But for the average user, for someone who's not an enthusiast or a collector, that's awful. Eco 4060 does a 2.25 or I think it's 2.25 minutes at true 1400 as well, so much shorter than the Cotton Intensive final spin, but still provides good spin performance. So that is an alternative. Just be aware though that if it detects it as a full load, it will heat to 60, so don't be washing anything that can't survive a 60 wash on Eco 4060 in case it decides to heat to 60. Yeah, also because of the spin washers it will perform on these cycles as well, they aren't suitable for most types of laundry. If you're washing anything other than bedding, towels, general clothes, like I washed a single sofa throw on Eco 4060 and I basically had to babysit the machine because the spin washers, and this is not the machine's fault by the way, it's my own fault for improperly loading it. Let's just say the machine was trying to walk. Again, not the machine's fault, that's my own fault. So I had to manually abort every spin wash by just pausing it and resuming it. But again, my own fault. Eco 4060, if you load a small load, is about 2 hours and a half. If you load a full load, it might go up. I don't know. I haven't been able to get it to sense up on Eco 4060. It might not even sense up. But I've run the 3 hour 36 cycle. That was what I ran with the sofa for. I bypassed the sensing to do that. So yeah, but that acts very much like Cotton Colour, or Cotton Intensive in this case. Now, I'm going to talk about the sensing. This is another major letdown of this machine. I'll go to Cotton for this. You notice it's 3 hours 29 by default. You would think it would reduce quite a lot for a smaller load. Unfortunately not. The biggest difference it can do, and I might actually show you this, so I'll just take these out. These have been pre-washed, so these are what I'm going to use for the demonstration, these clothes. I just want to show you this quickly. 3 hours 29 with an empty drum. So this is the sensing phase. Yeah, 3 hours 14 for an empty drum. Again, awful for the average user. That's a 15-minute difference. That is the biggest difference it will do in sensing, both ways. It will sense up by maximum 15 minutes, which is quite good actually. You don't want it any more. I actually think it could get away with not sensing up at all with the default cycle lengths. But to sense down by only 15 minutes when the default Cotton cycle is so long in the first place, and it's the only cycle that actually provides acceptable performance, really, except Eco 4060, but for some loads that's not quite suitable. So yeah, major letdown, and unfortunately that's something you won't know till you get the machine. Now there is alternatives. Obviously I said before, there is this synthetic cycle, which I'm going to have to cancel this cycle to show you. So there is synthetic, that does allow 1400, it allows up to 60, which is hot enough for most of your loads. I only really use 90 myself if there's a load of heavily soiled white bedding or towels, or for maintenance washes. Everything else goes on 60 or 40. Those are my most used temperatures, 60 and 40. Obviously, everyone's different in that respect. But I think synthetic allows a very good range of temperatures. It allows from cold to 60. So might be useful for most people, but as I mentioned, the spin performance of this is going to be awful. Although this rinses well because it does 3 deep rinses, although they are short, they do the job quite well because it does proper intermediate spins too. But if you use this cycle, do perform a full 1400 spin afterwards. There's also the mixed cycle, which is very similar to synthetic. It just has much slower intermediate spins and only allows up to 40 degrees max, and it's a little bit shorter, 10 minutes shorter. But it does allow up to 1400, but this defaults to 1000. But if you just increase it up to 1400, it will be very much the same as synthetic. And there's also the 2 steam cycles. They're a little bit shorter. But there is other cycles as well. You want an hour cycle, you can do sportswear, 58 minutes, allows up to 40 and allows 1000 spin maximum, but again, if you respin on the spin only cycle, won't be a problem. You'll just get worse spin performance than from any other brand because of the drum design. You can probably kind of see it. I'm not going to move the camera, but what I am going to do is take a quick photo of the drum and then show you that photo. Now you see what I mean here? There's so little holes in that drum. And it also looks pretty small as well, but it's not as small as it looks. It is a true 54 litre drum. I can fit the same amount of stuff in there as I can fit in my 53 litre Zanussi Flexitime. So it is true to the size. It is 58 litres. Anyway, I feel like I've moaned about programming and performance enough now. Is there anything I'm missing? Yes, there is. The drum clean cycle. Now, this is quite useful actually. A drum clean cycle is something I think should be standard on all machines because a question I get asked a lot is, what cycle do I use for a maintenance wash? And for reference, the answer to that is a long boil wash. You want either cotton or white 90 or 95. You don't ever want to use below 90 for a maintenance wash. Otherwise it's not going to do the job ultimately. The exception is 70 because a lot of cleaning cycles are 70 degrees. I would still rather use a 90-95 wash because even though most machines only heat to about 80 nowadays, 75-80, it's still better than 68 or so, or exactly 70 as some machines do. But again, 70 is not bad. This particular machine, it has 90, which it won't let you change for obvious reasons, and the spin is 800, which again it won't let you change. But the spin's pretty useless because of the drum design. It doesn't get the water out of the drum, the leftover bits of water. And also the door sill design on this machine collects water a lot, and so does the door glass, so you will have to give the sill a wipe around after the drum clean cycle. On high speed spins with loads, that's not usually a problem because the air being circulated by the drum and the vibrations from the load usually gets rid of that water. Anyway, besides the point, The problem with this drum cleaning cycle is it does nothing to clean the drum other than just tumble. It's basically just a shorter version of cotton. That's it. For a drum cleaning cycle, ultimately what you want for a very good performing drum cleaning cycle, you want either fast distributions, or even better, you want some good spin washes with boiling hot water. And this can do 250 RPM spin washes. As I mentioned before, it does it on cotton intensive and Eco 4060. Yet for some reason they haven't implemented that for the drum clean cycle, and I can't figure out why. It was the same on WFQY and WFQA ranges, but even this ultimately technically next generation WFQP model is exactly the same. So I don't use this as a drum cleaning cycle. I use it as a short boil wash. Obviously, if I'm cleaning the machine, I'm going to use this over the 4 hour nearly cotton 90, because you know there's no point to do 4 hour boil wash, even for me, for a maintenance wash. But because that doesn't do anything other than just wash normally, you can put clothes in there and it won't damage the machine or anything, because as I say, it doesn't do anything different, which is also why it doesn't sense the load either, because there's no reason for it to detect whether there's clothes in the drum. Whereas my other machines, like LG for example, that has a tub clean cycle. It detects the load because it does fast distributions, or filtrations as LG calls them, on its tub cleaning cycle, which obviously if you put a load in there, and it didn't detect the load, you know, it could cause some banging from that. But it does detect the load, and in LG's case, if it detects the load, it will not do any of those fast filtrations. I think that is everything. So I've covered pretty much. I think I've covered all the. One last negative, actually. I should have written a list. The two steam cycles. The steam phase is not a steam phase. It's a half an hour long, low level 50-degree wash, if that makes sense. It fills up to a slightly lower level than the main wash normally is. It heats that water up to about 53 degrees Celsius and does short tumbles every so often. So they're slightly shorter than the normal tumbles for the main wash, and there's also slightly longer pauses between the tumbles. So it will be steaming the clothes, because at 53 degrees obviously there's going to be steam in the drum, but because the clothes are saturated in water, the steam isn't doing anything to the clothes. So it's not going to do anything. That you may as well just do a 60-degree normal wash, because it's not going to make any difference really, and it will use less electricity as well, because after it's heated to 53 degrees it will then top up with water to the normal main wash level, so cooling down the water that's already in there. And if you selected it higher than 40 degrees, so if you select 60 or 90, it will then continue to heat up to temperature. So certainly not the most efficient washes, those two. But the allergy steam does do 4 rinses, so you know that's good. But you can get extra rinse on the other cycles, because there is an extra rinse option there, and you can actually enable that on allergy steam, which will give you 5 rinses, and not very long rinses. Actually, they're normal length. It's another cycle I'm thinking of that has short rinses. Synthetic, that's got short rinses. So yeah, I think that's all the. No, there is one more. I apologise for this. As I said, I should have made a list, because this machine, the list of negatives just it seems to keep getting longer. And this is going to be a long video, by the way, and you'll see why when it gets to the demonstration point. The down cycle. It's, according to the manual, designed for pillows, duvets, quilts, that sort of stuff. It is useless for that sort of stuff. And I can tell you that from my own experience. I've washed pillows on the down cycle in my previous hisense. It was hopeless at balancing them. It barely even filled up with enough water on the main wash to wash them properly, although the rinses were fine. And it spins at 600 RPM, which is awful for pillows. And with the drum that these machines have, it did nothing. They came out saturated pretty much. That video is still up if you want to go and have a look. What's awful about this cycle, the two worst things are, one, the length. That's not long enough to wash a duvet properly. Not when this machine. The main wash is so short. 30, 40 doesn't allow above 40, which for a duvet and for duvets and pillows is awful, because you know you can boil wash duvets and pillows. Most people don't. I don't tend to boil wash them unless necessary. I will never do them below 60. Duvets, pillows, that stuff, never below 60 for hygiene reasons. Some down items, like down jackets, which is actually what I would argue this cycle is better designed for, because I washed a denim jacket in here, not a down jacket. We don't have down jackets here, unfortunately. But I washed a denim jacket on this cycle. Actually works really well. It's really good for jackets, although it needs a much faster spin speed. But yeah, spin speed 600 by default, also the maximum. So you got 400, 600 or 0 to choose from, which, as I mentioned, is awful for duvets. So yeah, use cotton. I know it's long, but it will be the best cycle and best performer. Cotton 60. Long, but will be worth it in the end. Synthetic is a no-go for duvets. I tried that. It's designed for 9 kilos, the synthetic cycle. So it should be able to wash it, but unfortunately, due to the shorter nature of that cycle, shorter by hisense's terms, 2 hours is what I would consider starting to go into the normal territory of cotton cycles. You know, you would think it would give it enough time to fill up with the proper amount of water, but you're not going to notice it in this cycle because these are already partially wet, but if you watch other videos of this machine, you'll notice it takes longer than most machines to saturate the load and to actually wash it fully. No, not wash it fully, you know what I mean, to get to soak it fully. But because of that, because duvets are highly absorbent, when I tried washing a duvet on synthetic, it moved onto the heating stage while it was still doing its top ups, and because it was taking so long, I filled it up. I added 15 litres of water to it, and then it just washed. It washed brilliantly. The rinses weren't an issue because it doesn't take ages to saturate the load on the rinses. It fills up until it reaches the right level. But the main wash, it does a predetermined length top up, washes for a while, does the same thing again, and so on. And that doesn't work for duvets. You can get away with it for clothes, but not for duvets. The synthetic cycle works brilliantly for pillows though. I washed pillows on there, came out brilliantly. I've done that multiple times. Cushions too. On the synthetic cycle, works brilliantly. Obviously do respin them though at 1400 because as I said, the spin performance from synthetic is terrible. So yeah, and actually, myself, if I was washing a duvet in here, I would use cotton 60 intensive, and I know that. Well, actually, you may as well use cotton 60 intensive for a duvet if you're going to use cotton 60, because it's only like 11 minutes longer by default anyway, and you'll get far superior performance. So yeah, I think I'm finally finished with the negatives about this machine. Some of the more positive things, I've mentioned a couple already. I do like the cotton 40 and 60 intensive separation now, because on the WFQY and WFQP models, WFQY and WFQA models, the cotton colour 60 cycle is, because that's the only variation you can do that allows that acts like that cycle. It's a predetermined temperature of 45 degrees because it's an eco cycle. It's the old eco cycle before Eco 4060 was introduced. They kept it on and just put it in the cotton colour cycle instead. So yeah, unfortunately, that was the only variation. It was ultimately a 45 degree wash, and you don't get an option to go higher or lower. I actually think you could have done 40 degree version, but I don't know whether it would have acted the same, and I don't know what temperature it would have reached, but certainly not 40. It would have been more like 30 or so. But they have separated it here. They've made them non-eco, so they do 40 and 60 respectively. Some other positives: the Quick 15 cycle down here is one of the better rapid washes I have used. All this is it's a very quick main wash, a single rinse, and a short final spin at 800 RPM. If I remember correctly, that is the maximum. Yeah, it is. So that's the maximum. Obviously, if you turn the spin off, it's going to get shorter. But it also allows, instead of, because it defaults to 20, excuse me, obviously being so short, sorry about that. That was completely unintentional. Because it's so short, it defaults to 20. 30 is 20 minutes. And if you want to do 40, it's half an hour. So you can do very short washes. I think this reaches temperature, because I ran it through this quick 40 cycle on my previous hisense just before I sold it on, just to kind of rinse out anything in the drum. It didn't need a full maintenance wash, because it had only been done fairly recently before that. But I just gave it this cycle to basically flush out the drum, make sure there was, and also to make sure there was no stagnant water in the pump. I then emptied out that water, the excess water from the pump and all that, made sure it was clean. So yeah, I think it does reach temperature. So yeah, good. What I will say is though, don't fall into the trap that most people do, washing everything on this cycle. It is not suitable in the slightest for it, because it's not designed for that. This is designed for a very small load that needs just refreshing, and it's designed in emergencies. If you really want a quick cycle, as I said, use the sportswear cycle. It's short, but it's designed to actually wash. Cycles like Quick 15 are not designed to actually wash, they are designed to refresh. So yeah. Anyway, that's besides the point. I want to talk about design now, and I'm going to continue on straight away with positives. I have briefly mentioned the design before, but I'm not going to put what I've mentioned before into the design category, because I only mentioned it about the drum. I'm going to re-mention that in here. But I'm going to start out with the door, actually. So I'll just turn this off. So the door is it's the same as the Gorencia doors now. It's a wave active door. The previous models, the WFQY and WFQA models, use Hisense's own door. this is built by Hisense, by the way. This is nothing to do with Gorenje. Even though Hisense and Gorenje are technically the same company now, they still both have their own individual models. So there are Hisense built Hisense branded models, which is what I've got here. That's all of these WFQ models are built by Hisense alone. Then you have the Hisense branded but Gorenje built models, which is the WFG models. So WFGC and WFGE models in the UK. They are Gorenje models, and the WF5S models, the top of the line at the moment, are Hisense's own as well. But the trick is, this kind of drum, if you see that drum on a Hisense, it is Hisense's own. And if you see the Snowflake drum, which is the predecessor to this, that's also Hisense's own. If you see like what they call the wave active drum, and that's the drum typically seen on Gorenje wave active models, basically if you see anything other than this drum or the Snowflake drum, it's a Gorenje model. That's the biggest, that's the most easiest way to determine for the average user. There's no heat shield anymore, which I really like. The WFQY and WFQA models all have heat shields on the door, which I really don't like. I'm not a fan of heat shields at all, and I especially hate when they're dark. The WFQY heat shield is slightly tinted. It's not that dark. You can notice the tint. It is very noticeable. But if you have some form of light, like even just the main light in the room, you can see inside with relative ease, so it's not awful. The WFQA models, on the other hand, they have a different style heat shield, and that's extremely dark, which I hate. I actually hate the WFQA door. But also, that's the only difference I can see between the WFQA and WFQY ranges. And the WFQA is supposed to be higher end, just because it has a different door. So, if you're going to buy either of them, I would actually say go for the WFQP out of all three ranges. I think this is the best out of the three, if you must go for a Hisense. But my advice is, for the average user, choose a different brand, because Hisense is not suitable for the average user, in my opinion, and based on my experience. And obviously I've mentioned the drum design as well. Again, I will show you the holes in the drum. There we go. That drum design is terrible, and it was the same on the WFQY and WFQA models. They haven't changed it for some reason, and yet it's this machine's ultimately this machine's biggest the biggest downfall. Because if that drum just had a sensible amount of holes, that would remove a ton of performance issues, and it would make the spin-only cycle actually acceptable. The other thing I like about this, drum though, I love how it looks. That's the thing. And the annoying thing is, I love how the drum looks, but its performance is awful. And in the grand scheme of things, performance over looks is, you need to have a good performing drum. For an enthusiast and a collector like me, when I have other machines, I can get away with just having this as part of the collection because it looks nice and because I like it, because it's entertaining. But for the average user who only has one washing machine, you need something that performs well. You need something that's going to be reliable and washes your clothes sensibly and efficiently. Unfortunately, this just doesn't cut it in most of those aspects. There are two variations of this drum, one with holes, which I've got here, and one without holes at the back I'm talking about. Obviously there's always holes around the side, even though there's not very many. The holes on the back plate, which is the back of the drum, in case anyone's wondering. I have this model has the holey version. There is a holeless version as well. I'm not so fond of the holeless version. I don't think it looks quite right. Because the backplate looks so similar to Whirlpool, because they've kept that design on from when Whirlpool and Hisense were working together several years ago. They've kept the backplate the same style, but just added holes. When you have no holes there, it looks like a Whirlpool drum, like exactly like a Whirlpool drum, but then the sides of the drum are Hisense, like a Hisense style, so you know, it doesn't look right to me anyway. Plus, I much prefer drums that have holes at the back. They just look so much better. But that's my personal opinion. That makes no difference to the machine whatsoever. Now, hidden features, none of them are really hidden. I suppose the only thing that's hidden when you look at it is how to use the favourites thing. So obviously if I press it, my favourite is set to Cosson 60 intensive, because that's the cycle that's my favourite cycle on the machine, is the Cosson 60 intensive and the Cosson 40 intensive, because they're effectively identical, just different temperature. To set something as your favourite though, let's say I wanted to set synthetic 40 with 14 spin as my favourite. If you press and hold the favourite until that flashes and then appears, that's now saved to your favourite. So if I turn the machine off and go to Eco 4060, then press favourite once, it brings up that cycle without you having to find it again. But I will warn you, if you then press an option button, it will go back to the cycle that is selected on the dial. So yeah, that's the only... Well, it's not really an annoyance because it should be fairly obvious that that's what's going to happen. The child lock is indicated here. You hold temperature and spin. I can demonstrate that if I just quickly start a spin only cycle. Let's try that again. And you'll get a little smiley face with a hat appear there. And if you, I don't know if it affects turning the machine off or not. That's a bit of a useless child lock, isn't it? They just have to turn the machine off and it completely cancels the cycle and gets rid of child lock as well. See, I didn't even disable that. So that can be added to the negatives as well. The child lock doesn't work. Also, the mute and unmute function. Obviously mine's muted because I hate the beeper on this. If you press and hold spin and favourite, it will beep to indicate it's unmuted. I don't think it beeps to indicate it's muted. Yeah, you can see why I muted it. That is incredibly annoying. I don't like beepers in the first place. It's just not for me. So I much prefer when it doesn't beep. Especially when it's as obnoxious as that. Although that's not as obnoxious as MIDI's beeper, because that's, 2 beeps or 3 beeps every time you do something. So yeah. Right. Finally, demonstration time. And I better hurry up because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. I didn't think this video would take this long. It's been 50 minutes just talking about the machine. In my other review and demonstration videos, that part takes 20 minutes, I think. Roughly 20 minutes or so. But yeah, there is a lot to say about this machine, and unfortunately most of it is negative, but I will talk about that more at the end of the wash. It's not going to be a long wash. It's going to be a moderate wash. I'm going to use Sportswear 40 with 1000 spin. I know I'm supposed to show it spinning at max speed, but because of how this machine's programmed, there are no cycles that allow 1400 RPM that are shorter than 2 hours, or 1 hour 51 technically, unless you use cold wash, which I'm not going to do because I don't like cold washes. So I've got the load back in. It's 2 hoodies and 2 pairs of trousers. One of the pairs of trousers is matching to the hoodies. I'm obviously wearing the other pair of trousers that are matching. So the other pair of trousers that are in the machine are unrelated. They have been pre-washed. They were featured in the separate pre-wash video, which I filmed directly before this, but you may have seen a while ago or after this. I'm not sure yet. I don't know what order I'm uploading this in. I'm going to be using, I'll pick up the box to show you, some of this Daz Cherry Blossom powder. It is biological washing powder, so it's going to work well at 40. I'm going to be using that much. That is about 50 millilitres, which is going to be plenty for this machine. You can put it in the drawer, because I know people are going to ask me about that. It doesn't matter ultimately either way, unless you're using pre-wash. If you're using pre-wash, you have to put some in the main wash compartment in the drawer, or the main wash is going to be useless ultimately. But for the pre-wash, it doesn't matter whether you put it in the drum or in the pre-wash compartment. And if you're not using pre-wash, it doesn't matter if you put it in the drum or in the main wash compartment. Just never put softener in the drum, because a softener literally stops detergent being effective. It cancels it out. I'm not going to be using any softener this time because I really like the fragrance from the Daz, and I don't want the softener to ruin that. So I like to use softener when detergent doesn't leave any fragrance. I can live without softener. I'm one of those people. I don't hate it. I wouldn't say avoid using it. It doesn't hurt as long as you keep up with proper maintenance. There's no reason to not use softener. So as I said, I'm going to be using Sportswear 40 with 1000 spin. Hoping it doesn't sense up. It probably will. Okay, we'll try it. But if it senses up, I'm going to have to swap it to a different cycle. quite there yet. That will be about 37, 38 in the drum. I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to put it round to spin only at 1400. As it's exactly the same, it will just go to full speed. So at least there's a video, a part of the video with it being at full speed, as that's what I aim to do with all of these videos. Right, that's all finished. I'm going to not wait for the door to unlock before I start talking, because otherwise the video is already long enough. That was the full 1400 spin, and that's the same spin you would get on cotton. Obviously I only held at 1400 for just over a minute or so, which isn't bad, but as I mentioned before, because of the drum, it is bad. If the drum had a better design, it wouldn't be anywhere near as bad. So, a couple of things I forgot to mention. One, this machine suds locks so easily. It's because of a not very strong pump and a not very well programmed on-off pattern. Because you'll notice pretty much as soon as it hits 400, or I think even before it hits 400 on the burst, so before it's finished accelerating, it switches the pump off. So water's building up but not being pumped out, which is not very clever programming. It cycles it way too much on the spins, particularly on the first burst. The first burst, it shouldn't turn the pump off because all the water's coming out then. The majority of it when it's accelerating initially. But also the pump, however they've designed the pump in this machine, it's efficient at extracting water on the main wash. You'll notice it drains quite quickly, like when it's draining from the main wash and from the rinses, it drains fine then. But when it's actually spinning, and more noticeably with a slight imbalance, however they've designed it, it's not very effective. But interestingly, and here's the very interesting part, very absorbent loads that you would expect to suds lock don't usually in this machine. You remember I said I washed a duvet? In most machines, duvets cause suds locks. In this, which suds locks with everything, it did not. So, yeah, that's something to bear in mind. And I'm going to put that down too. Duvets balance out perfectly most of the time in the drum, particularly if they're the same size as the drum, which the duvet I was washing was. It balanced out perfectly. So effectively the machine drained as efficiently as it would, you know, if it was draining from the main wash, which is good at doing. But if you're washing something like a full load of towels, for example, which will get a bit unbalanced, that's going to suds lock like mad. And I have a video of a huge suds lock with towels. And the thing about how Hisense deals with suds locks, it doesn't do anything. It just continues spinning, but it won't accelerate past 400 RPM if it can't. Like if there's too much suds there and it can't accelerate past 400 RPM, it will just stay at 400 RPM until the spin finishes. And then it will proceed into the rinse, which will significantly affect rinse performance and make it even worse than it already is. So yeah. Also, another thing that may be off-putting to some people is the noises the machine makes when it's spinning. Now everything you're hearing in this video is normal. This machine is fully functional. It is supposed to do that. Those noises are entirely normal. The knocking you're hearing when it's spinning, the knocking that isn't lining up with the drum's rotations, that's down to a mixture of the bearings and the belt. And they pretty much line up because it's as the belt passes over the pulley in a certain place, the belt makes part of the noise and the other noise comes from how bearings weigh. It's slightly misaligned, I believe, is what causes that. I have the noise from the belt alone happens on my Zanussi Flexitime. if I take the belt off and spin the drum really fast by hand, absolutely nothing happens then. And if I change the alignment of the belt as well, I can sometimes get it to disappear, which is how I know it's the belt. On this, it won't disappear because it's a mixture of the two. But to be honest, most machines make some similar noise, so it's not. I would normally say it's not anything to be concerned about, and I actually normally wouldn't mention it. But the reason I'm mentioning it in this case is it's way louder than any other machine. Like it's so noticeable. It's noisier than the motor, and the motor's pretty noisy on this machine. Being a cheap inverter, it's going to be. Saying that, actually, it maintains a constant volume as it increases speed. It's very much like LG. LG's motors don't really get any louder as they increase, they just change pitch. That's what happens with Hisense's motors. And I think actually a lot of brushless motors are the same, thinking about it. Whereas brushed motors tend to get louder as they get faster because the friction. So it's something to bear in mind. It does have quite a cheap sound, and that would be because it is a cheap machine ultimately. The actual build policy of the machine is brilliant. It weighs 58 kilograms, which is significantly less than most machines weigh, and yet it's really stable. The only time I've had it moving was by user error. That was my own fault. Under normal usage, this would never move. It doesn't even bang under normal usage because the movement sensors stop it, and they're really well programmed as well, those movement sensors. You saw that, oh no, you didn't see them activate on this one. In the video I did before this, the movement sensors activated a couple of times. But in this, it found it a lot easier to balance, and I think it's down to, I think they tangled a bit in the pre-wash, and that's what caused the balancing difficulties. But obviously that's not part of this video, so we're not going to focus on that. But yeah, that's another thing I want to point out as well. And I know this video is really long, but there's so much to talk about with this machine. The balancing on this machine is so much better than the balancing on the WFQY and WFQA models. The WFQA and WFQY models, they have very unpredictable balancing. They're either sometimes, they can be like this machine and spin sensibly. Sometimes they will be really sensitive and abort spins, which my WFQY did on camera. And also they like to limit the WFQY models and WFQA models. They're the sort of, if it doesn't reach a balance within, let's say, probably, I think it was about 8 or 9 attempts or so, it would then limit to 800 even if it was perfectly balanced when it found a balance, which doesn't make any sense to me. Well, this machine has spent, no it hasn't actually, that was the flexor time. This machine has never had to spend that much time balancing. It would probably still limit if it needed such an excessive amount of time to spin, but it doesn't ever need that amount of time. It's very good at spinning ultimately. They've really improved the balancing for the WFQP range. Couple of other things. What was I going to mention? No, that's it. Right. I'll have a look at the results and then we'll decide what we're going to score it out of 100. Now, as I said, the spin performance of this machine is not that great. They are, you can tell that they have been spun. You obviously can't see that, Let me just focus a bit better. Right, I focus like that for now so that there's no flickering. You can't see on camera with this, but sometimes when I wash t-shirts and I hold them up to the camera, you can see patches of uneven spinning on them. But again, that is down to the drum design and the short hold. This machine is pretty bad at spinning, with spinning unevenly for obvious reasons. And I can feel that in these in this pair of trousers. I can feel that. They're also damper than they would be if I spun them in the LG at the 1400. Another point I want to make. I mentioned that the machine spins at a true 1400 on cotton intensive and on Eco 4060. The other 1400 spins are only 1330 roughly, which is that is a typical Hisense thing to do. They have done that before, and actually on the WFQY and WFQA models, the cotton intensive cotton colour on those models and Eco 4060 spins went slightly over 1400. I measured mine at about 1440 RPM, so almost 1500 in washing machine speed. That would be considered 1500. But this does true 1400. So yeah. As for detergent scent, it smells lovely. I will say the rinse performance isn't bad from this cycle. But it's normally with hotter and longer washes when you start to see the suds appearing more, or if you add slightly too much. I didn't add quite enough this time, but these weren't that dirty anyway, so it doesn't matter. But if you add slightly too much detergent, then you know you're going to notice the rinse performance is going to be fairly subpar, and actually if you add the right amount as well, it won't be that great either. And yeah, this hoodie in particular is much wetter than the rest of the item, so that's what I mean by uneven spinning. Now, what are we going to give this out of 100? I think I'm going to say 35. Now that doesn't mean I dislike it. I do quite like Hisense. I do think they're interesting. For a cheap brand, which they are, it's not awful. For an enthusiast and collector like me, they can be quite fun to use. And I do find them entertaining. You know, there's a reason I bought another one, even despite having the manufacturing defect on the first one. They are entertaining, ultimately. They can be interesting to use. They can be very useful to use as well. With their excessively long cycles can really come in useful, actually. For example, if I need a very long boil wash, for example, when I boil washed the door sill off of my Zanussi Aqua Cycle that I got second hand and it was filthy, I put it in Hisense and put it on the 4-hour boil wash to try and clean it as best as possible. It did a lot, actually. It was quite good. So yeah, my other machines, especially the Zanussi Flexitime, if you loaded a small load, it would sense right down. Obviously LG is an exception because it can be bypassed, but the boil wash on LG is only just over 2 hours long, which is an average length nowadays. So I like having the Hisense because I have a machine that I can do such a long boil wash on if necessary, or such a long 60-degree wash as well because they're the same length. There is a lot of negative points about this machine, and they are such important negative points that really my advice is, if you're watching this video because you're looking to buy one of these machines, choose something else. Even for the same price, you can find better, and you can find something that will perform much better and will give you that better performance in significantly shorter times than a Hisense would. If you're not bothered about having to use a 4-hour or 3.5-hour cycle for everything, these aren't bad options, really, in the grand scheme of things, because that 3.5-hour and 4-hour cycle, they actually perform really well because of the long, fast hold on the final spin that they do. But as I said, those cycles are not suitable for everything because of their spin washes. They are very intensive cycles. You wouldn't want to wash shirts on that cycle because of the final spin. It would crease them to death. So yeah, my advice is choose something else. I got this for £279. For the same amount, you could get a Beko WT series, which they're not my favourite personally, but they would suit a lot of people. You can also get an Indesit, a Hot Point. They would be better options. Obviously, you choose what you buy, but as someone who has used this machine, and as someone who actually likes Hisense, believe it or not, yeah, my advice is just go for something better. Anyway, this video has been more than long enough, so yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it helped someone. I hope it was useful. If it helped you, and if you liked it, then please leave a like. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.